This is a deep dive into a royal life that defies every fairy tale cliché. We're talking about Victoria, the Princess Royal, eldest daughter of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Forget the tiaras and glittering balls for a moment, because this is a raw, unfiltered look at a woman who was a force of nature, caught between two colossal empires and a family that, for all their love, often fundamentally misunderstood her. Her story is a testament to resilience, intellect, and the sheer grit required to navigate a world that was constantly trying to diminish her. Our journey with Vicky begins on November 21st, 1840, a day that should have been marked by unadulterated joy in the British royal household. Picture it: Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, young, ambitious, and at the pinnacle of their power, eagerly anticipating the birth of their first child, the much-anticipated heir to the throne. But when Vicky arrived, her birth was met not with cheers, but with a palpable sense of disappointment. The bad news, as it was literally labeled, was that the firstborn was a girl, not the longed-for son. The attending physician, in a truly remarkable display of insensitivity, even expressed regret. Can you imagine starting your life with that kind of shadow cast over you? From that very first breath, Vicky, though affectionately known by her father as Vicky, faced a world that hadn't quite anticipated her, a world that subtly, or not so subtly, communicated that she wasn't quite what was desired. This early disappointment set a peculiar tone for her childhood, a period marked by profound paradoxes. On one hand, there was the deep, undeniable bond she shared with her father, Prince Albert. He was a visionary, a man of profound intellect and progressive ideas, and he saw a kindred spirit in his eldest daughter. Albert nurtured Vicky's brilliant mind, recognizing her potential and encouraging her intellectual curiosity in ways that were highly unusual for a girl, let alone a princess, of that era. He called her Vicky, a tender nickname that spoke volumes about their close relationship. On the other hand, her connection with her mother, Queen Victoria, was starkly different, described with chilling accuracy as cold and distant. This wasn't necessarily born of malice, but perhaps a combination of the Queen's own complex personality, her demanding role, and perhaps even a lingering disappointment over Vicky's gender. Growing up within the gilded yet rigid confines of a royal palace, Vicky found herself constantly under immense pressure. The expectations placed upon her were not just high, they were impossibly so. Her education, orchestrated largely by her brilliant but often unyielding father, was nothing short of rigorous. Prince Albert, in his typical meticulous fashion, even penned a detailed book outlining the curriculum for his royal heirs, a testament to his belief in the power of knowledge and his desire for his children to be intellectual giants. Vicky was expected to absorb it all, to master subjects ranging from arithmetic to philosophy, to engage with liberal ideas that were considered groundbreaking at the time. However, even in their intellectual brilliance, her parents had a significant blind spot, a startling lack of understanding regarding basic childhood development. This manifested in moments that, in hindsight, seem almost comically cruel. Picture a young Vicky in the throes of teething, instinctively bringing her bracelet to her mouth for comfort. A perfectly normal, natural, and even beneficial action for a baby. Yet, instead of comfort, she was met with a harsh rebuke from her mother, who shockingly deemed it a sign of a deficient education. This seemingly small incident encapsulates the immense, suffocating pressure Vicky lived under. Every action, every natural childish impulse was scrutinized, judged, and often found wanting against an impossible standard. It was a constant reminder that she was not just a child, but a future royal, and every perceived imperfection was a failure of her upbringing. Despite these significant emotional and developmental hurdles, Vicky didn't just survive. She blossomed into a truly exceptional individual. She possessed an insatiable thirst for knowledge, devouring every subject placed before her. From the intricacies of mathematics to the complexities of philosophical thought, she absorbed it all. Crucially, she embraced the liberal ideas that her father championed, concepts of constitutional monarchy, progress, and intellectual freedom, ideas that would later put her at direct odds with the staunchly conservative, autocratic Prussian court she was destined to join. Her linguistic talents were particularly astonishing for her age. She began learning French at 18 months, a tender age when most toddlers are just forming their first sentences. By the time she was 4, she was already learning German. This linguistic prowess wasn't just a sign of her innate intelligence. It was also a desperate attempt to please her ambitious parents, to fulfill their towering expectations, and perhaps to finally earn that elusive, unqualified approval. This intellectual brilliance, while a gift, came at a cost, a constant, often exhausting, striving for validation from those who held her future in their hands. The stage for Vicky's future, as was often the case for royal children, was set remarkably early, long before she had any real say in the matter. When she was just 11 years old, her parents, with an eye towards strategic alliances and the intricate web of European dynastic politics, had already earmarked a potential husband, 19-year-old Prince Frederick William of Prussia. This wasn't about love or personal connection. It was about power, influence, and the blending of royal bloodlines. It was a calculated move, a glimpse into the cold, pragmatic reality of royal marriages. Their first encounter, in 1851 at the Great Exhibition in London, was a rather formal, adult affair for a young girl. Yet, even at that tender age, Vicky, with her burgeoning intellect and remarkable fluency in German, managed to impress. She got on very well with the older Frederick, a promising start to a relationship that would define her life. This initial connection, however, was merely the prologue to a long and complex courtship. For the next 4 years, separated by distance and the demands of their royal lives, Frederick and Vicky exchanged letters. These were not just polite formalities. Their correspondence grew increasingly intimate, revealing a burgeoning connection and laying the emotional groundwork for a future that neither of them, especially Vicky, could fully foresee the challenges of. By 1855, Frederick returned to England. While the official diplomatic reasons were stated, everyone knew the real reason he was there was to conduct a personal assessment of Vicky. He was there to determine if she was indeed a suitable wife, not just politically, but personally, for a future king. The stakes were incredibly high. Meanwhile, the Prussian court, steeped in the traditions of absolute monarchy and deeply suspicious of the more liberal, constitutional monarchy of England, was initially resistant to the match. They much preferred a Russian Grand Duchess, viewing the weaker English system with disdain. This fundamental clash of ideologies, the liberal constitutionalism Vicky had been raised to embrace versus the autocratic absolutism of Prussia, would become a relentless source of conflict and pain for Vicky throughout her entire life in her new homeland. When Frederick arrived for his assessment, Vicky was 15 years old. By the beauty standards of the time, she was not considered a great beauty. She was described as ugly, with her relatively short stature of 1.5 meters, just under 5 feet, and a round face that strongly resembled her mother's. Physical appearances, however, were secondary to the political and personal compatibility. Despite any perceived physical shortcomings, Frederick found something compelling in Vicky's intelligence, her spirit, and perhaps the genuine connection they had forged through their letters. After just 3 days of meeting her family and observing her closely, he proposed. The couple became engaged, agreeing to wait until Vicky turned 17 to marry, a standard practice to ensure the bride was of a suitable age. Yet, this significant engagement was far from a cause for universal celebration. In Prussia, Vicky was viewed with suspicion and dislike, seen as a foreign influence bringing liberal ideas that threatened their established order. In England, conversely, Frederick was reviled, his family often derided as a wretched dynasty. The tension surrounding the union even extended to the wedding venue. Frederick's family staunchly insisted the ceremony be held in Berlin, a clear power play to assert Prussian dominance. But Queen Victoria, fiercely protective of her daughter and keenly aware of the symbolic importance of the event, stood her ground. She demanded the wedding take place at St. James's Palace in London, asserting British sovereignty and ensuring her daughter had the full support of her home nation on her momentous day. On January 25, 1858, Vicky and Frederick were wed in a grand ceremony. Soon after, Vicky embarked on her journey to Berlin, a new life and a new identity. She was leaving behind the comforts, however complicated, of her English home for a court that was largely hostile. As the narrative so aptly puts it, upon her arrival in Berlin, her real troubles began. This was not just a geographical move, it was a plunge into a profoundly alien and unwelcoming environment. Life in Berlin proved to be a harsh, uncompromising awakening for the young princess. The German court, steeped in rigid tradition and deeply suspicious of foreign influences, held Vicky in utter contempt. This wasn't subtle. She endured public insults from numerous members of Frederick's family, a constant barrage of slights and criticisms designed to undermine her and remind her of her place as an outsider. Her new surroundings were a stark contrast to the grandeur and, despite its pressures, the relative comfort of British royal palaces. King Frederick William IV, Frederick's uncle, seemingly as a deliberate act of petty cruelty or simply disdain, relegated the young couple to a dilapidated section of the Berlin royal palace. This was no grand apartment. It was a Spartan, uncomfortable space that shockingly lacked even basic amenities, like a bathtub. Imagine the indignity for a British princess accustomed to a certain level of comfort. Her mother-in-law, Princess Augusta, was a particularly relentless tormentor. Despite sharing some ironically liberal views with Vicky, Augusta found fault with everything, nitpicking Vicky for the smallest things, making her feel constantly inadequate. Vicky was also immediately thrust into a grueling, relentless schedule of traditional ceremonies and social obligations. She was frequently forced to stay up past midnight for formal events, only to be expected to rise early to receive guests. This punishing routine was designed to exhaust her, to break her spirit, and to ensure she had little time for her own pursuits, or for building a strong bond with Frederick, independent of court interference. Financially, Vicky was given a shockingly meager allowance, so insufficient that she frequently had to dip into her own personal dowry, brought from England, just to maintain a semblance of a respectable life for herself and Frederick. This wasn't about lavish spending. It was about basic upkeep and upholding their royal image. Even her attempts to cultivate a small piece of home, to create an English-style garden, something that might have offered her solace in a foreign land, became a point of major contention. The English gardening style was different from the Prussian, and this seemingly innocuous detail sparked what was known as the Anglo-Prussian Garden War. Every single aspect of her life, from her living quarters to her personal interests, was scrutinized, criticized, and made deliberately difficult, a constant reminder of her status as an unwelcome outsider. Motherhood, for Vicky, was a journey fraught with immense emotional complexity and often heartbreaking challenges, particularly in relation to her firstborn son, Wilhelm. Less than a year after her wedding, Vicky found herself pregnant, and in January 1859, she went into labor. What should have been a joyous occasion quickly descended into a terrifying ordeal. The birth was incredibly difficult, complicated by the baby being breech, which made the delivery long, complicated, and nearly fatal for both mother and child. It was a traumatic introduction to motherhood. When young Wilhelm finally arrived, the joy was immediately overshadowed by grave concerns. He had sustained significant nerve damage around his shoulder during the traumatic birth, and, even more critically, it's believed he suffered from oxygen deprivation to the brain for 10 agonizing minutes. This catastrophic injury left his left arm atrophied and a full 15 centimeters shorter than his right. In a desperate, heartbreaking attempt to protect their son from the unforgiving scrutiny of the Prussian court and to shield themselves from potential blame, Vicky and Frederick initially concealed the true extent of Wilhelm's condition. They only revealed the devastating truth to Vicky's parents, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, a full 4 months later. This early act of concealment speaks volumes about the immense pressure they were under and the fear they harbored about how their child's disability would be perceived in such a rigid, appearance-obsessed environment. Despite the challenges with Wilhelm, Vicky went on to have 7 more children, bringing her total to 8. Among them was Charlotte, her eldest daughter. However, Vicky's focus, almost obsessively, remained on Wilhelm. Desperate for her firstborn son to be normal, to overcome his physical limitations, and be accepted in a society that valued strength and perfection, she pushed him relentlessly. She demanded that he master horseback riding, a feat made almost impossible by his impaired arm, forcing him into a perfection that was physically agonizing for him. Her attempts to fix him grew increasingly desperate and, in retrospect, harrowing. She subjected him to agonizing electric shock therapy, ostensibly designed to correct perceived imbalances in his head. Later, she employed animal baths, a truly barbaric procedure where Wilhelm's atrophied arm was submerged in a tub of animal entrails, based on a misguided belief that this would somehow restore function. These desperate measures, born of a mother's profound love and a yearning for her son's acceptance in a profoundly demanding world, unfortunately caused Wilhelm immense physical suffering and, more damagingly, deep-seated resentment towards his mother. Tragedy continued to stalk Vicky's personal life. In 1866, she suffered the unbearable loss of her 4th son, Sigismund, who died at the tender age of 21 months from meningitis. Years later, another son, Waldemar, also passed away in 1879. These profound losses, endured in a foreign land with little emotional support from her in-laws, took an immense toll. Adding to her pain, Queen Victoria, surprisingly, offered little, if any, genuine sympathy. In a chilling display of her own emotional rigidity, the Queen believed the loss of a husband was far worse than the loss of a child, a sentiment that must have felt like a cruel dismissal of Vicky's grief. As Wilhelm grew older, Vicky's well-intentioned efforts continued to backfire. In a fateful decision, she inadvertently hired a tyrannical tutor for her son. This tutor, rather than fostering the liberal ideals Vicky championed, instilled in Wilhelm the dangerous concept of divine right and a ruthless ambition to overcome anyone who stood in his way, to assert his power without question. This particular upbringing, combined with his physical challenges and the intense, often misguided, interventions from his mother, irrevocably shaped Wilhelm into the powerful, autocratic, and often unstable figure he would ultimately become, setting him on a collision course with his mother's ideals. During this tumultuous period, Prussia itself was in a state of constant flux and turmoil, embroiled in numerous conflicts and engaged in aggressive expansionist policies under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck. Frederick's father, the reigning king, was an aging and increasingly conservative monarch, and the political landscape was volatile, with the king at one point on the brink of abdication. This instability only intensified the already simmering animosity towards Vicky within the Prussian court and among the general populace. Despite her immense personal struggles and the hostility she faced, Vicky remained committed to her duties and her adopted country. She selflessly dedicated herself to humanitarian efforts, helping to establish a military hospital and personally caring for the wounded during conflicts. Yet, even these compassionate actions were met with ridicule and suspicion, dismissed as attempts to exert British influence or simply as misguided liberalism. The emperor, keenly aware of Frederick's more liberal leanings and seeking to sideline him from positions of power, increasingly brought the young Wilhelm into public events, cultivating him as a future leader who would embody the autocratic ideals of the Prussian state. The German populace's dislike for Vicky was deeply rooted in the evolving political landscape. As Prussia grew increasingly autocratic and militaristic, Vicky and Frederick's steadfast championing of liberal ideas and their belief in a constitutional monarchy, much like Britain's, stood in stark contrast to the prevailing absolutism. They represented a threat to the established order, an unwanted foreign influence, pushing for reforms that many in power feared. The political tensions reached a terrifying peak in 1887. With Emperor William, a frail 90-year-old, his health rapidly declining, a cabal of Vicky's powerful enemies saw an opportunity. They plotted a daring coup to place Wilhelm on the throne immediately, circumventing Frederick's rightful ascension, and to exile Vicky to England, with the chilling threat of execution if she ever dared to return to Prussia. This was the dangerous, cutthroat political landscape Vicky navigated every single day, always under threat, always fighting for her ideals, and always vulnerable to the machinations of those who sought to undermine her. Just as Frederick was on the precipice of ascending the throne, his health, already fragile, began a rapid and devastating decline. His voice, once strong, grew hoarse, and by November 1887, he could no longer speak at all. The devastating diagnosis, confirmed by British doctors brought in by Vicky, was a malignant growth, cancer of the larynx. It was a death sentence. Despite it being their only chance of survival, both Frederick and Vicky, perhaps in a profound act of defiance or despair, refused aggressive surgical treatment. Their children were horrified by this decision, and Wilhelm, in a cruel and deeply unsettling twist, even accused his mother of being happy that Frederick was so gravely ill, a testament to the bitter resentment that festered between them. On March 9, 1888, Frederick's father, the old Emperor William, finally passed away. This event officially elevated Vicky and her beloved husband to the titles of Queen and Emperor of Germany. It was the culmination of decades of waiting, planning, and enduring hardship, the moment they had both tirelessly prepared for. However, their reign was tragically, heartbreakingly short-lived. Frederick, already weakened by his illness, ruled for a mere 99 days. On June 15, 1888, just months after his father, he succumbed to his cancer, leaving Vicky a widow and a dowager empress, stripped of the power and influence she had so briefly held. In a remarkable display of foresight and defiance, knowing the danger she faced from her enemies, and fearing what they might do upon Frederick's death, Vicky had taken a decisive action just before his ascension. She had secretly dispatched 3 boxes containing highly sensitive personal documents, her private correspondence, her political notes, her personal diaries, to the safety of Windsor Castle in England. This clandestine operation was a masterstroke, safeguarding vital records from her adversaries. Her instincts proved to be absolutely correct. Immediately after Frederick's death, Wilhelm, now Kaiser Wilhelm II, ordered soldiers to storm and meticulously search his parents' private quarters, desperate to find any incriminating documents that could be used against them or to discredit Frederick's legacy. But thanks to Vicky's swift and strategic actions, they found nothing. She had outmaneuvered them, even in her grief. With Frederick gone, Vicky's position was irrevocably altered. She was now a Dowager Empress, a title that carried little real power or influence, and Wilhelm wasted no time in making sure she understood her diminished status. He evicted her from the royal palace, effectively banishing her from the center of power and virtually isolating her from society. Despite this profound demotion and the relentless pressure, Vicky, ever resilient and fiercely committed to her liberal ideals, continued to criticize Wilhelm. Her sharp intellect and moral compass wouldn't allow her to remain silent in the face of what she perceived as his increasingly autocratic and dangerous tendencies. When the emperor, in a public display of his own hubris, wrote in a foreign guestbook that "the will of the king is the supreme law," Vicky, appalled by his absolutist stance that harkened back to an outdated era, retorted with cutting accuracy that a 19th-century monarch simply could not make such a claim in the modern world. She saw the dangerous path he was taking. Even Queen Victoria, while sympathetic to her daughter's plight and the hardships she endured, occasionally chastised Vicky. She believed Vicky had made too many concessions to Prussian demands, and, in moments of frustration, reminded her that she was an English princess first and foremost, suggesting perhaps that Vicky should have asserted her British heritage more forcefully in the face of Prussian hostility. Vicky's later years were marked by increasing physical ailments and persistent emotional turmoil. She suffered from debilitating headaches and chronic skin rashes, finding what little relief she could in self-medicating with morphine. Some modern medical experts, looking back at the available historical records, believe she may have suffered from a mild form of porphyria, a genetic disease known to run in the British royal family, and which was later also suspected to have affected her daughter, Charlotte. Her letters from this period, particularly those written in her grief and frustration, reveal the profound impact of her life experiences. They are often raw, unfiltered, and at times startlingly harsh. In one particularly poignant and arguably cruel letter about young Wilhelm, she wrote, "The boy is really clever for his age. If he hadn't got that unfortunate arm, I should be so proud of him." This stark, almost brutal statement, while difficult to read, underscores the immense pressure she felt as a mother of a disabled child in a royal family, and the societal expectations that weighed heavily upon her and her children. It was a reflection not just of her own feelings, but of the unforgiving world they inhabited. In 1898, Vicky's already fragile health took a turn for the worse. She was diagnosed with late-stage breast cancer, a cruel and painful end to a life marked by so much suffering. Her final wish, a testament to her lifelong battle against the Prussian court and her autocratic son, was to ensure that her more recent letters, her thoughts, her observations, her criticisms, were transferred safely to England. She orchestrated a final, clandestine operation to keep these vital documents out of Wilhelm's clutches, ensuring her voice, her truth, would survive beyond her. Vicky passed away on August 5, 1901, at the age of 60, after a life of extraordinary intellect, profound struggle, and relentless determination. In a poignant and historically resonant turn of events, Wilhelm, her son, ultimately proved his mother's warnings and predictions tragically right. After decades of increasingly autocratic rule, Fueled by his own ambitions and the aggressive militarism of Prussia, his reign culminated in the catastrophic outbreak of World War I. By 1918, facing overwhelming defeat and losing all support from his own people, Wilhelm was forced to abdicate and live out his remaining years in exile. He was the last German emperor, a stark and symbolic end to a dynasty that Vicky had tried so desperately, and often futilely, to guide towards a more liberal, constitutional, and, ultimately, more stable path. Victoria, Princess Royal, was truly a woman ahead of her time. She was a beacon of liberal thought, intellectual curiosity, and progressive ideals in a world that often stifled such qualities in women, let alone princesses. She was a loving mother whose relentless efforts to protect her children, particularly Wilhelm, were often misunderstood, misinterpreted, and ultimately contributed to the very resentments she sought to avoid. Her story is a powerful, compelling reminder of the often hidden struggles within royal families, the immense pressures faced by those born into such positions, and the enduring spirit of a woman who dared to dream of a different future, even when all the forces around her conspired against it. Her legacy is not just one of a princess, but of a formidable intellect and a resilient spirit who fought for her beliefs until her very last breath.